Presidential Wealth Management. Coming up, why recession doesn't always mean housing crisis, how the psychology of the home buyer is changing, and the outlook for home prices. Going into 2020, all signs pointed to another good year for residential real estate. Interest rates were low, people were buying and selling homes all over the country. Then COVID-19 hit us. And the government hit the brakes on the U.S. economy. Buyers couldn't tour homes. Demand dried up. Well, where does it all go from here? Will all home tours be virtual from this point forward? Who's more affected, buyers or sellers? And what's the possible short and long-term damage to the real estate industry? We're joined for this next hour by Mr. Stuart Kroll. He is a leading real estate agent with Liv Sotheby's International Realty in Denver. And Stuart, first, welcome. Second, first things first. How are you and yours adapting and adjusting to all that we're living through right now?
Yeah, thanks, Keith, and thanks for having me today. We're doing well, and fortunately, most importantly, family's good, extended family's good. I've got really family all over the country, and everyone's healthy, but certainly everyone is now at the point, I think, where we all know someone or a few someone's affected by COVID, and just keeping my thoughts and intentions high with those people, of course, who are affected by this crazy thing we're all living with.
Agreed. So many things are going to change as we move into the future, and we're all here trying to figure out what those changes might be. So we'll get to that in just a moment. If you own a home, if you own investment property, rental properties, if you're planning to buy or sell a home, stay with us. This is the Eagle's Nest Webcast. I'm Keith Weinman with Taylor Leary from Presidential Wealth Management.
Fantastic, Keith. Stuart, great to have you on. Looking forward to hearing all of your expertise and knowledge that you have on the real estate industry. So a little bit of housekeeping before we kind of jump into everything. I want to introduce our viewers to what's going on and how you can interact with this. We really do like to make this an interactive experience. So you'll notice on the bars on the side of your screen there that you have a chat box. So this chat feature is a great way to reach out with questions. We have kept this as a private chat box, so it's not going to be open to the public. So the questions that you have will be kept private. So only Stuart, myself, and Keith will be able to see these questions. So, again, if you feel a little sheepish about some of the questions that you might be asking, not everybody's going to see it. We will just be the people that see that. So again, feel free throughout this, ask those questions, and we'll do our best to field those. We certainly have a lineup of questions for Stuart today, but I know that you have your individual questions. So use the chat box, use as much as you'd like. There's no hold back. We don't want you to, there's no tickets and there's no charge for those questions. So use the chat box feature as much as you like, and we'll do our best to respond to that. Notice also that we want to keep this interactive by using polls. So I actually have a couple of polls for us to answer today. We want to hear your feedback. Take a moment when I prompt you. You don't need to be on point here, but take a moment to answer those. They're very basic, very simple, but we want to see what's going on, how you're feeling about the real estate market right now. So again, I will prompt you when the time calls for it to answer those polls. But other than that, we just really look forward to our conversation with Stuart today. I'll also give us a chance to connect with us at the end. There will be an offer page to connect as far as scheduling a one-to-one meeting, a one-to-one call with one of our advisors, whether it's Keith or myself or another advisor in our office. So I invite you to select the Schedule Now button. That is in the Offers tab as well. So let's just dive right into it, Stu. All right, so the April report came out from the Colorado Association of Realtors, and the statewide numbers showed that single-family home sales dropped 20% compared to a year ago. Mm-hmm. Condo and townhome sales dropped over 30%. Now, again, this is statewide, and it actually looks like the numbers for Denver are maybe even higher. When I look at this, this is always kind of interesting because of what's going on in real estate versus our world, which is the stock market. And even though there's been a huge plunge in sales, prices have withstood this test of time, which is always interesting in my world. So now with the spike in unemployment, consumer credit getting hit, and then also lenders tightening up some of their loan standards, what's your outlook for residential real estate in 2020?
Yeah, great way to start because yes, those numbers were crazy and far from expected when we started the year. You know, it was supposed to be another robust year, and all this stuff comes crashing down on us, and we have to now adjust. And I think the metric that you pointed out right up front is probably the metric that will be most volatile throughout 2020. Looking back in hindsight, it'll be units sold across the country, how many homes are moved, and who those buyers end up being. Ultimately, my industry, just like all industries, will be certainly impacted as far as, you know, the flow of money and the flow of really how housing sales on a residential level get done. But that doesn't necessarily mean that prices are affected. And one thing before I jump into this is, you know, ultimately we have this recency bias of the housing crisis, right? Of 08, 09, right? Thinking of a recession or a recessionary environment as a housing crisis. And this is not the case in 2020 in this new crisis we're in, which, you know, we went into this with about $6.3 trillion of residential equity tied up in America, in America's homes, right? And so ultimately people have a lot of more equity than they did going into the last recession. To tap into, to pull into, to really retain their homes. And so you haven't seen prices drop because, one, there just hasn't been enough time, right? There's a lagging effect between the data of real estate versus the stock market. Transactions take anywhere from 30 to 90 days to close. So you always have that lag in the data. But two, just ultimately, you know, we are impacted by a different supply and demand model than the stock market. And for now, and using Denver as a bit of a example here, that, you know, other markets around the country are experiencing as well. Really, when coronavirus hit, it just put a big old pause button on everything more than anything else. I mean, we did, with the buyer demand plummeted, sellers did not list their houses. Then in Denver, we couldn't show houses as real estate agents, so even less sellers listed, even less buyers went out. So the April data was just zilch across the board because of that, right? Yeah. And so, but when you have both metrics sliding down, that doesn't mean that home prices are going to go anywhere. So it's kind of an interesting tie-in.
Yeah, so you're seeing kind of the supply and demand meet each other, and that's why you're not seeing that fluctuation in the price necessarily. So I guess over the next 6 to 12 months, you talk about this delay effect. Do you see that there might be a dip or a flattening or a continual increase? I mean, you've seen actual home prices in the Denver metro area. I think it's like 6% based off of that same report just in Denver. Have seen a 6% increase since last year on the median home price. So what do you think as far as just the actual home values, the prices will go over the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah. So I think starting kind of wide and narrowing in, I do think in 2020 there will be somewhat of a price slide across the board and across the country. It'll really depend on your market and it'll really depend on your price point. But, you know, again, we are not insulated from all of the things going on. And with, you know, I don't know what the latest number is, something like 30 million unemployed at this point. You know, we have. That is a number that is just astronomical, that I don't think any of us know how that is exactly going to affect things. And although I think there will be a lot less foreclosure. I think people, again, going back to the equity comment I made, like, I don't think there's going to be as much foreclosure in the market, meaning I think that supply will stay in relatively stable environments across the country. But we are not immune to things like a employment number like that, right? And so there are some I think harbingers of a bit of a correction for real estate as well. It'll just happen later in the year. My kind of off the cuff prediction, at least for the front range, is you might see like a 1 to 3% price decline towards the end of 2020. But for now, what's interesting, and as you kind of brought up, Taylor, the numbers have been staggeringly positive, almost not, you can't even understand it. And that's really, again, it's when you work in this industry, you kind of expect that because there is a data lag on these things. It takes a couple months, even a quarter sometimes, to really understand what has happened.
So what do you attribute? Oh, sorry, just one quick follow-up.
Yeah.
There's a pretty big discrepancy between what happened in single family versus the condo townhome. What do you attribute that difference to be?
Yeah, well, they always act differently. For one, you know, the attached market and the detached market always act differently. I think, you know, my best guess at this moment really has to do with the fact that, and right now, for example, we're listing 3 different condo properties. They're all harder to show because of the nature of condominiums and the fact that, you know, there's so many people in one environment, as well as the fact that just their days on market as an attached unit are often longer, at least in Colorado, than detached product, right? So and I think, you know, psychologically going forward, there might be people who say, I'm not going to live in a multifamily environment, and I'm not gonna breathe the same air. I'm not going to have the same ventilation. I'm not going to see people in the common pool area like I used to want to. Yeah. And so I don't know that that's necessarily going to mean price corrections, but I do think demand is already impacted there.
So many questions. Does that mean when we see an apartment complex or a townhome complex with a common pool area that we'll likely see it with little, if anybody, in it?
Yeah.
Or one person at a time? Or
This is the big question I have, and I think as someone in residential who helps guide people through this process, I think the questions that I'm going to have to answer before we go see properties are going to have to change, and that is going to be one thing, right? Do you want to be around other people, and what is your kind of, I guess, risk tolerance is a way of putting it in terms of being in an environment where there's going to be other people around, and you can't really control that, right? So take urban Denver, for example. You know, they have been and are continuing to build thousands of units of luxury apartments right now. And they have already seen their numbers of new leases go down dramatically. And I think part of that is just because we were on a lockdown and quarantine and all this. But, you know, through the summer, that data is going to be very interesting to track, because you're going to know probably come July or August, you know, what that trend is like and how people are changing their demand and preferences for housing. You know, Keith, your neck of town might get a lot more populated, I'm sorry to say.
I want to bring to light, just so we can get our audience. So I noticed that people are starting to respond to this, but if you haven't seen it, we've got a poll up right now. It is, where do you expect home prices to go from here? Go up, go down, or stay flat? Very simple, 3-part question. So I invite you to answer that question, and I'd love to see what you all are thinking about home prices and where they go from here. So yeah, that'll be great.
Well, and that said, Taylor, that's exactly, we're thinking the same thing. And Stuart, I want to just back up a little bit. You mentioned possible, if not probable, 1 to 3 percentage points slide in home prices, perhaps in 2021 from where they were at the beginning of all this in 2020. That's something that everybody's sensitive to. It just simply, I mean, drive it all the way down to a core instinct. You know, we spend a lot of money for the home. We make payments. We love to see the price rise. We hate to see it drop for any reason. And I'm trying to correlate that. You said that a recession doesn't mean housing crisis. Don't link those two. They're not directly linked. I accept that completely. So then take us a little bit deeper into the reason for a slight housing price slide next year when the economy should be recovering.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that has to do with, like, when you look at just the macro environment of residential real estate, you've got, it's all just comes down to the basic equation of supply and demand. And so supply is both resale, right? So if I'm a seller, I'm selling my home in the open market, or new construction, which is your Richmond home builders, all the way down to your, the larger scale enterprise builders that are publicly traded, down to your boutique mom and pop development shop. So again, taking Denver as an example, we have a supply that is and has been relatively limited. We have had about a month to a month and a half's worth of inventory at any given time on average over the last 3 to 4 years. Meaning, if everyone who was demanding to buy a home bought a home and no other supply came on the market, it would take a month and a half for all of those buyers to find housing. That's what that metric means. So we got to consider what's happening on the demand side more than anything when we talk about a price slide. And this is where I said, demand plummeted, went off a cliff in April, because, and it's and generally for Denver, April and May are our busiest months of the year. Most new under contracts, sometimes generally most new listings hit the market. Buyer demand is a frenzy. At any given time, there could be 25 buyers for any one seller in the years past for Denver. We're nowhere near that metric now, and the balance is starting to come together. Now we still have more supply than we have, or still more demand than we have supply. But when those things shift, and supply has been going up over the time frame since the quarantine or the lockdown, I guess. So you have supply generally rising right now, month over month, more and more units on the market, not finding buyers. That means that demand is falling. We have to really keep in mind of that equation. And at the same time, there's been a lot. The month of March was historically a huge month for home starts in new construction, meaning in the Denver metro region, and I can't remember the number off the top of my head, there were more starts, more new projects breaking ground in the Denver metro region than there had been over the past 3 years. So that they have to get those up. They have to get them up going. That's inventory that is already on the books for these home builders, right? So supply numbers will continue to rise. It's what happens to demand. And so if those two meet, or supply starts exceeding demand in a radical way, you are going to have price corrections across the board. And so that's where we really need to keep a hawk's eye on. But I say 1 to 3% because I do not think this is going to be a radical shift. And the 2008, 2009 market, I mentioned foreclosures, was basically, precipitated on people could not afford their mortgages. So they were being foreclosed on, losing their homes left and right, and supply went absolutely gangbusters nuts. So investors could come in, scoop up deals for 60,000 when they used to be 300,000. I mean, it was radical. That will not happen here.
Yeah, we like to use a term called forced sellers, and we're not seeing the forced sellers in this market.
Yeah. You might see a little bit, but there's just, in my opinion, right, just one man's opinion here, I don't really believe that is going to be this type of market. Although the price correction is, I think, at this point likely.
Right now, are things better for buyers or sellers? And then let's layer that question. Which way is that likely to go toward the rest of this year and into next? Does the market favor buyers or sellers?
Yeah. Let me start actually by saying, so at my team, we work all price points, right? So we have a pretty good handle on like the first time home buyer stuff, as well as the luxury multi-million-dollar sales. And, the latter is always the first to go, right? So when luxury market, the luxury real estate market, when the quarantine was announced and COVID became kind of a more of a crisis scenario rather than just something that was happening overseas, the luxury market just kind of shut off. I mean, showings went down by 50% overnight and then went to zero once there was a mandatory lockdown. Yeah,
Why? Why is that?
Oh, well, that's because, I mean, you got people who, discretionary income goes down, their net worth goes down because of stock. As you guys are well versed in, they have their cash tied up in the market, or they're putting it to work in their business. And so, unless they have just cash sitting in a bank account, which some buyers do, they are, pulling this money from other areas of their net worth, right? And so to finance or collateralize debt or however. But what the interesting thing was, and this always happens in a correction environment, when that happened, my phone started ringing, and it was people who were saying, "Hey, you've got this, $3 million listing in Cherry Hills. Will these guys sell for 2?" And I'm like, it's been a week into lockdown. I think they're probably okay. Well, you want to see the house first, so it's you always have those opportunistic folks coming in and saying, this is the time to make a big bet. And, it was a little early for those calls, but that's just one story of kind of a greater picture of what's happened on the luxury end already. Now, to round out the answer to that question, so I would say on the luxury end, the buyers are going to win right now. And the deals that we've put together in the last 6 weeks, the buyers are absolutely winning right now. But when you slide down to more of like a first time home buyer market, for Denver, that starts around 400,000, and then average price point for detached family is around 500,000. The scales are reversed, and there are multiple offers all over the marketplace. Home prices are definitely going up in those at those price points right now. So it moves to a seller advantage under the 750 mark currently.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
I got to jump in here. You were talking about the apartments and what's going on there. So from my own vantage point, I used to live in the Highlands, and it's every corner is getting knocked down to build a new densely populated apartment. And so over the last 10 years, we've seen a massive expansion in new apartment buildings. Now, a lot of those people that are moving into those places are millennials. All right. So, and we kind of get a bad rap that, we don't want to own homes and we don't want to, we don't want to get married or have kids or do all those things. And we're just the anti everything. So we've got the baby boomer laughing at us here. So, but the reason I bring that up is that, I've heard anecdotally that this lockdown has actually been a bit of a shock to some of those folks that they've been cooped up in these small spaces. And so the desire for a yard, the desire for their own garage, their desire for, the other benefits that a single family home provides, those are actually starting to become more of a real thing. So what is your take on it? And do you think that there's some pent up demand there that maybe not be showing on the numbers that you're talking about?
I do. And I think that goes back to my comments about just like how the psychology of the buyer is going to change over the next 12 months. And, the one thing you do have to consider and why developers have spent millions and millions of dollars in a place like Denver building these types of units is because they were filling up. Crazy enough, they were absolutely filling up. And you've had for a long time in Denver, close to like urban centered areas where people could, congregate, meet people, live close to work, and then learn the city. Right. And so it's a great advantage for someone moving from, and we get so much coastal influence and migration here that it's a great opportunity to live in one of those units for a year or two, then, bounce around town and find what you're looking for. I do think there is going to be a demand shift towards that level of housing. However, the affordability is still going to be an issue, right? If even if at the high end of my estimate, if we go down 3% in residential real estate value, that's still almost nothing as far as, a $500,000 or $600,000 home, which is really where you have to be. I mean, $450,000 in some areas, but you got to really be in that 500 plus mark to get anything, really worth buying around Denver, in the detached space, especially with a yard and with some of those features with a garage. So affordability is still going to be a concern. And so it's going to have to, the trade-off is going to be, well, buddy, do you want to live here? Or, or do you want to buy here? Do you want to buy exactly what you want and you won't live here if you can't? Or do you want to live here because it's the right opportunity for you? And what I would argue is Denver is still, we went into this with one of the most diverse workforces in the entire country, as well as, little known fact, but we actually had the highest percentage per capita of workforce already working from home. So we were ready for this. The 9% of our workforce was already working from home. So it's like, I don't actually think that Denver is going to be, affected for like years and years. I think it's going to be a very robust comeback. It just might not come back as early as we all want it to. Mm-hmm. But that said, it's going to be an affordability versus do you want to be here trade-off.
Mm-hmm. Well, those mountains aren't going anywhere, so.
Yeah, right. They're going to be here long after we're all gone.
Isn't that the truth?
Stuart, here's one that I just simply heard. And I don't remember who said it, but they were supposedly an expert in your business. It was a theory that as boomers pass away, as the baby boomer generation leaves us, there won't be enough buyers to buy all of their homes. Mm-hmm. And perhaps even a level deeper than that. The buyers at that point in time won't want the same homes that the boomers retired in and then passed away. And therefore, the conclusion was we could see a negative trend hit the housing market. We could see entire areas that nobody wants to buy the homes. Is there anything to that?
I actually don't think there's anything to that. I've heard that many times. I think it's always been, and I thought this before the crisis, kind of an overblown theory of, kind of expectant and excited real estate investors thinking there's going to be another time like 08, 09. Because frankly, after 08, again, recency bias, right? After 08, 09, everyone was like, holy crap, I can get rich investing in real estate as long as I wait for the next crisis. And it's like, that was 100-year thing. You missed out. It's not happening again. Who knows, right? I don't know the future just like anyone else, but here's what I think about that. Again, using Denver as an example, the boomers live in a pocket close to town, right? They live in key neighborhoods. If you're talking about Denver Metro, they live in the Cherry Creeks, the Hilltops, the Greenwood Villages, the somewhat Highlands area, just core neighborhoods where you are always going to have a couple things going for you: walkability, proximity to town, a good urban vibe without being in the downtown zone, and then in the outer core and approaching the suburbs, the average age goes down radically in Denver. So of the owner and of the occupant. So if those people in that outer ring wanted to and had the money, they would move closer to town generally, given if they had a choice, right? So what you're going to see, in my opinion, is there are the pockets of town in every situation. There are the towns that, markets I'm not familiar with, that sure, maybe there won't be kind of like a replacement, or the replacement will happen slowly. In a place like Denver, it'll happen quick because people want those homes. And, one thing about real estate and why the rule is location, location, location is because we cannot make more land. We have only so much land to parcel off and live in. And that's why prices do what they do. So boomers in Denver live in core areas that are always in high demand. And there's no reason to see that they wouldn't continue to be the core neighborhoods people want to live in.
Is there a type of home or a differentiation between single-family homes, ranches, multi-level homes, condominiums, apartments? I said take apartments out because you rent apartments, you don't buy them. but investors buy them. So is there a type of home that is going to increase in value more than others as we move into the future, say over the next decade or several decades? Is there a type of home that is more likely to not increase in value because of demographics changes in the population and what you see going on in Denver with the workforce, with things that we go through like Corona, with all of the changes that go on?
Yeah, great question. I think it'll really resemble what has already kind of happened, right? Which is like attached homes, townhomes, condos, etc. Have always, on a national level, not just Denver, appreciated slower than detached single family. So, and when I'm in a buyer consultation with anyone, whether they're a first time home buyer or a really seasoned vet at buying real estate, it's always about their goals. And one thing we assess is, the appreciation over time and what you're really looking for. And, attached properties are generally going to appreciate much slower, right? So they have to fit your lifestyle. And this is again, one of my big questions of, will attached properties actually continue to appreciate slower out of all of this and detached appreciate quicker because of our preference changes and our desires because of coronavirus to not live close in proximity to others? I don't know, but that would be an interesting thing to know right now.
Well, and that brings up another question. And Taylor, I yield to you. I'm hogging the time here, but all these questions keep popping up. Okay, and the question was, and you may have answered it in the answer to the last question, can you tell me why I see apartments popping up everywhere? I mean, everywhere. I see apartment developments and maybe they're condo developments. I don't know. Well, I used to have a thing where they ought to pass a law to when you start building something, they put up a sign to tell you what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And it's not. But it seems that we see apartments or condos, whatever they are, popping up everywhere. Am I imagining that?
You're not. And they are apartments by and large. Condos have started coming online. That's a whole nother digression that I won't take, but they are by and large, they are apartments. And the cheeky answer for you really is because they're getting rented. And that really is the truth. They have been occupying these apartments left and right. And so back in like 2015, 2016, when they really started putting these more luxury mid-rise or high-rise buildings, online and developing, it kind of made sense, right? Because it fit a demand for, we have to increase our density to provide greater access for affordable housing close to town and incentivize millennials, right? Or people coming into the workforce or moving from other areas to come here and live. And so that trend, for Denver is a little bit crazy to see because we're not used to all this construction of this certain kind, and it doesn't feel like it should all be being built. But we annualized, we net anywhere from 50 to 60,000 people moving to Denver every year, net. So over the past 6 years. So, you take that and you spread them out between basically what ends up being anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 new units over town in a given year. And it's like that, it makes sense. The math works out, that's only like 20-ish% on a good year of those units, and filling the net population growth that's coming. So the math works. The developers who are piggy banking this are, have the data, or else they wouldn't be making these huge multi-million-dollar bets. But what is going to happen next is the big question, right? And that's going to be really, really about how people's psychology changes.
Wow, I love that. Yeah, that's fascinating stuff because we always go back to 2008, 2009. Some of those bad bets were made by very, very smart people, and it's kind of interesting. So for the folks, our viewers, I've got another poll up. Are you planning on selling your property or a property in general? This doesn't necessarily need to be your primary residence, but are you planning on selling a property in the next 12 months? We'd love to hear what your thoughts are, what your plans are. And then I also invite you to use the chat box feature to throw that in there. Throw your questions up. I'm noticing that we're getting a little bit of traction here, so we are seeing some questions. So I gotta say this is something that happens in our industry a lot, and it's usually driven by technology conversations or upheaval here. But there's the famous quip by Mark Twain: "The reports of my death are greatly exaggerated." Over the last 3 or 4 weeks, especially since we've been in this lockdown scenario and people haven't been able to see homes, they've been able to virtually tour them, but they haven't needed a real estate professional, somebody like you, to go see them necessarily. Is this the beginning of the end? I mean, is this where we're starting to see, maybe that the real estate agent, the real estate advisor is no longer needed, and that the social distancing is going to take effect in that space? And what are your thoughts there? And what, more importantly, what changes are you making in your business today to adapt?
Yeah, God, I hope so, Taylor. I hope so. But no, really, the thing about this is, and this is something I've said since the beginning of my career, my value is not finding your house. It used to be back when I had all the data and you needed it, but now you have all the data and I have all the data. And so if you find a house that you want to buy, great. It might be, I'm working with at any given time, 20 or 30 buyers. Like, I am never going to match the time that you're going to put into your own home search, right? And so I think, we have needed this time to say, like, the virtual tours and the online marketing, the online strategy and presence, like, that only helps the consumer. And, there's antiquated real estate agents who think otherwise about what I'm going to say, but it helps us too, because we can continue to be of more value with our knowledge than just our ability to say, hey, here's a pretty house that popped up online that anyone could have found. Now, there's beyond the finding a home in a real estate transaction, there are many, many, many things that have to be navigated. So from the negotiating of the deal to the guidance and consultation that has to happen from start to finish, to contractors and vendors and scheduling and inspections and all of these things that converge into what should be a smooth and hopefully stress-free process. But at this, the role of the real estate agent needs to change. And really what I would say to the question about adapting is, for my partner and I mean, we've already been adapting to these types of things and trying to be more of an online kind of just knowledge base rather than just the person who goes and unlocks the door for the past several years. And so these things, in my opinion, while they are painful as an industry to go through, are going to create more opportunity and more innovation, which means more value for the consumer. And so, at the end of the day, the agent should be there to advise you and help you make the most informed decision possible. And when you make that decision, you should have full clarity on it. But it's your decision, right? That we're just here to help guide the process. And if we're not doing that and we're just sending you online listings, it's like, of course, I mean, why would I pay you? So why are you even in business? So I'm actually excited about this time, because I think it's going to weed out the agents who actually add tangible value to their clients versus the ones who kind of get into this business because they see a fat paycheck and a fancy car.
Stuart Kelly on the chat box asks if you have seen a shift in the number of qualified buyers that may link to the unemployment situation.
No. I think, the shift I have seen is that and it makes sense, of course, is that there are people who were qualified who now have taken themselves out of the running because of a furlough situation or a potential furlough situation or a salary cut. We have dealt with all three in our clientele. And so there is definitely, I think the reverse shift is happening than what you're probably thinking, where I don't think a bunch of people who are unqualified are asking for a mortgage. I think it's that qualified people are taking themselves out of the running and pausing their home search until they have more certainty.
Fascinating. What other major shifts might we see because of demographics in the years and the decades ahead? I mean, let's look into the future. Get out the crystal ball. I mean, even if it's outrageous, what are some of the more outrageous things that just might hold water? What are some of those things that you've heard said?
Yeah, well, Keith, your crystal ball is probably more polished and sharp than mine is. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to match your wisdom, but I'll try. I think really, like, innovation is key. And one thing that I hope I don't open up too much of a can of worms. I'll try to be concise, but one thing about watching the past recession and the recovery that happened thereafter, and everyone was talking about inflation. And the risk of inflation, the risk of these bailouts, et cetera. Well, GDP outpaced the level of inflation the last decade, tremendously. And so our inflation the last decade was actually under average, which back in 2008, 2009, 2010, I don't think any analyst would have predicted that, right? So that's crazy. But at the same time, in 2008, 2009, you could go to your local restaurant, you could get a haircut, you could drive your car, you didn't have to wear a mask, right? There was all this stuff that wasn't happening. So now my thinking is, like, if we're going to do the same thing and outpace inflation and all this printed money that's coming into our system, and really, do the same type of recovery that we had after 08, 09, it's going to have to be on the backs of new companies and new innovations that are, I know it's probably not the shared economy. It's probably not real estate. It's probably new businesses that have pivoted and go digital and connect people in ways that we don't even know yet. That's my very far out crystal ball thinking. But honestly, that's what I'm kind of looking for, because and this is, I hate to say this because I'm a son of a retailer who had to lay off all 165 of his employees when this first started. And I just don't see retail and restaurants and coming back in the same way ever. I think that psychology will always be affected. And I am saddened by that, because my mentality won't change personally, but it's a thing that, when fear gets into people's minds, it's very, very hard to correct, and it takes a long time.
Wow. It's scary when you look into the future, and given technology, given something like we're going through with the COVID-19, you can't really make a prediction, because and in our business, Taylor, in my business, I mean, we need to try and expect the unexpected when we're doing financial plans for our clients, whether they're people who are working for another 20 years and saving to be retired to enjoy life, or people who are now in that phase. Expect the unexpected and be ready for it as best you can. That's become a lot harder.
Yeah.
So, Stu, one of the things, and you're speaking my language here, because you're talking about behavioral finance and that emotional side of the buying process and the selling process, and it's a transaction, and it's not just a transaction of intangible property or maybe even tangible property. There's a human element to that, which is going to then introduce the emotional element to it. And it's interesting, and this is more of a comment, and then I have a question that's kind of part of this is in our industries, they've been talking about the death of the financial advisor, the death of the real estate agent, that these people are no longer going to exist. What I find is that it's the people that are good enough that are going to last, and that combining money is emotional. So your real estate transaction is going to be one of the largest transactions that you ever have in your entire life, but by a long shot in some cases. Yeah. People's 401ks are oftentimes their second largest asset, or sometimes even their largest asset relative to their home value. And so those two things are deeply tied to our hearts. and our emotions. And without technology is not going to solve that. And so my belief is that we're going to have this beautiful interaction between combining the human element with technology and bringing those two together. And at the end of the day, the best people will win. And I think that that's what ends up happening. And you brought that up when you said this will weed out some of those folks that maybe aren't as good. And there's a joke. I grew up in Steamboat Springs. There was always a joke in the late 90s and then early 2000s that what you asked your waiter what they did, and they said, "I'm a realtor." And so
that's good.
Because everybody was doing something else, right? And so right now we're seeing probably this massive upheaval, which is also the opportunity. So my question to you is how has the buying and selling process changed just over the last 3 months? And then what do you see of those changes persist in the future?
Yeah. Well, I call it a flock to quality, right? It's going to be, you're going to have that, herd mentality of, people are going to need to see your value and up front. And here's one change already. The new buyer conversations that I am having, the new seller conversations I'm having that are referrals that people I haven't met before, they're digging in. They're asking the tough questions now, and they should be. And I love answering them. Like, that's what I'm here to do. But, the people who aren't as versed as I am are not going to answer those questions. And that, frankly, only helps me. But part two is, I think, so I had a closing yesterday. We went to the final walkthrough, and it was the first time I had met in person the client or seen the house.
Wow.
First time. Wow. And that was the first time for me that environment had ever happened. And I said that to my clients on site. We're all wearing our masks inside, and I'm like, this is weird for me too, guys. This is different. And I think, again, like, this is a process of decision making in both of our businesses. What decisions do I make with my money, with my time, with my resources, with my family? When it comes to a house, it's very emotional because there are so many wants and needs and desires mixed into a budget, mixed into a time frame. And so I think people are going to get more comfortable with the right consultation, get more comfortable doing things that are going to be virtual and are going to be, a bit more, leaning on your advisors while also doing your own due diligence in a way that doesn't have to be physical and face to face. And so, already in my business, and I'm really not one to go show, I don't show more than 5 houses at a time, because after 5, you can't even remember what you saw. The 6th one is like, I don't know. What was that? And then you go home and you talk to your wife and it's like, I can't even remember. So, I already had that rule going in, and now I think it's like, why would we see more than 3 or 4 at a time, right? Because there's so much we can weed out, and you know what? You don't need to look all over Kingdom Come to find the right property. And that could be, I don't care if you're a dream home buyer, first time home buyer, investor, stuff like that. And then on the counter, the sellers really have to know, you got to sell without being present. And that means your marketing has to shine through and be tremendous. And you really have to know how the buyer is going to come to find your property and look at that property online and really see themselves living there, right? Because before, the psychology is pretty house, cool bathroom, good neighborhood. I'll call my real estate agent and I'll go. Now it's going to be, pretty bathroom, pretty whatever, all that stuff I just said. But can I vision yourself here? Can you see yourself here? Wife, kids, family, spouse, you pull up to your driveway, you go in the house, you get a glass of wine. What does that feel like? They're going to take themselves there more than they did before. So as agents marketing properties, we have to know, like, that dream state, like, we got to create virtually now. We got to create online, because otherwise, like, showings overall are probably going to be far, far less. But again, I think that's a good thing.
Mr. Kroll, what would be the most important thought that you would like to leave us with?
Oh man. I think again, like, just, if you are someone who is concerned about this time and really concerned about, what happens next, and I think we all are to a degree, you've got to look at the people who are helping you make your decisions around what you're doing right now and what you'll do through the rest of this year, and reevaluate from a business perspective, not a, I know my neighbor or my friend or my cousin or whatever, but certainly anything that has to do with financially, like you really, really have to trust that counsel. And that should be, in times like these, that team is never more important to lean on. And I think, again, we're all a little concerned about what's happens next because none of us know. And we all want to set ourselves up for success. But, truthfully, you're only going to have that outcome if you are really clear on what is happening now and the foundation you're setting up in this time. And you know what? In recessions, there's more millionaires made than in any other time period. So there's opportunity too. And I don't want to look past that. I'm not myself personally, and I'm not letting my clients look past it either.
Thank you for that. If our viewers want to contact you, can you give them the tool to do that? Absolutely,
yeah. So easiest way is just to go to my website, Live Distinct, LIVE distinct.com. And actually on our homepage today, we have a little button called How Has Coronavirus Impacted My Home's Value? And if you're interested in reading our own proprietary report on what's going on and digging in a little more into what's on my mind, go ahead. We wrote that late last week, so it was published on our website earlier this week, and should be a resource for you. But all my contact info, livedistinct.com, as well as our properties and our a bit about our team.
Stuart Kroll with Liv Sotheby's International Realty. Can we visit again sometime? There are so many questions we didn't have time to ask.
Anytime. Let's do this.
Thank you. We'll look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yikes. Wow.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating.
What was your takeaway?
I was totally blown away. Question. How old is Stuart?
Stuart, I believe, is 28 years old, 29.
My God. He is one sharp guy.
Yes, he is.
I mean,
my network.
It really, yeah. That is so cool. Just I hear wisdom. I hear wisdom of somebody that I don't often hear of people at twice his age.
Mm-hmm.
He's experienced. He must, and he loves what he does. That shows too. Absolutely fascinating, the trends. And he cites going out. When I ask him, for the most important thing to remember, he cites the fact that this will probably be a recessionary time. And all that means is 2 consecutive months of negative economic growth. We've already got one. We know we're going to have another one, but it could end after that. And we could get into the positive. It would be a short recession. But he cites the fact that this is a recessionary time. And during a recessionary time, the financial decisions that you make have implications, ripple effects that might go out for the rest of your life. So you need to make those decisions very carefully. And my gosh, he says you need to make them with trusted counsel, a professional with experience in the ability in which that decision lies, as he uses his experience in the area of the largest purchase you'll probably ever make in your life.
Yeah.
That's golden. That's good.
Well,
wow.
It's that idea that you and I have been talking about, and I've been harping on this a lot over the last 8 to 10 weeks, is your decisions and actions during periods of uncertainty will dictate the success or failure of your financial future, whether that's your investments or your real estate decisions or what you do, from a financial perspective. These are really trying times, and I think the uncertainty is still out there. We're just slowly opening our economy, and we're not really seeing. I just found out yesterday that the Leadville 100 mountain bike race, which is something that I did last year that I'm going to do this year, is now going to be canceled. And all events for Leadville are going to be canceled that we're sporting. The community of Leadville is financially going to be devastated. I mean, This brings in, and God's honest truth, tens of millions of dollars to their industry or to their town, and it's gone.
That's
And
the
I'm like,
race
holy
across the
moly.
sky. Yes. And if you've ever been to Leadville, I mean, you get through it in about, what, 3-4 blocks.
Right, exactly. So there's just so
Yeah.
much uncertainty out there. And the one thing that I think that Stuart brought to light, and he's a total stud, and I'm really happy that he came on today, is just this idea of trust and bringing people in, just like you were saying, that you really rely on. And that, we talk about weeding out the bad and the good. And I think that this is going to be that moment where if you're not being reached out to by your advisor, where you're not getting those touches and you're not having those conversations to just understand what has happened over the last 8 to 10 weeks and how that might have an implication on your financial future.
Right.
That stuff matters, and these high touch moments are really, really important. So, I will just speak to you that this is going to be one of those times. If you haven't heard from your advisor, if you don't work with us, schedule some time to review your financial plan. Use the offer button to click there. It'll take you to a landing page, and just plug in your name. You'll get connected with us. We'll have a phone call. We'll figure out if it even makes sense to take the next step. But to understand where you are in your financial life is wildly important, especially with some of the challenges that we were just faced with, and most certainly with some of the challenges that we're going to be faced with over the next 12, 18, 12 months, 6 months, whatever that time frame might be.
Kathleen on the chat box says, thank you. No, Kathleen, thank you. Thank you for joining us. And we will keep the Eagle's Nest webcasts coming. We've already got plans for some really good ones coming up in the next few weeks. So we hope you'll join us. For Taylor Leary, I'm Keith Weinman from Presidential Wealth Management. Presidential Wealth Management securities and investment advisory services are offered through Forta Financial Group, Inc., a registered broker-dealer, member FINRA and SIPC.